We may think we know the names and the houses, but I'm sure there's an awful lot that we don't know about how they came to be and the families that have them, and in particular the current circumstances that prevail. So a really good night ahead of us. Thank you all very much. As usual, we're on YouTube as well, so we're live streaming now. Hopefully the YouTube audience have joined us, so welcome. And if you are watching on YouTube and you want to ask questions, there is a chat facility. You can ask them, and you may or may not get an answer. Okay, so I'll just hand over now to Mitchell. Welcome to Bodegarden. Thank you so much for coming along, and over to you for tonight's talk.
Thank you very much. When I came up, I was glad my brother Jeff showed me where it was, because I would gone to the old hall down the road. This is slightly different, I must say. It's beautiful. I wish every village in Scotland had a place like this. Anyhow, for the last 60 years, I have been reading pretty well history and very little else. And throughout Scottish history, I noticed that the first 7 of these dukes appeared for the last 600 years. They were always there. They were the movers and shakers in Scotland. Scotland has 8 dukes, if we exclude Prince Charles, who has 2 Scottish titles, Dukedoms of Rothesay, which is his senior title, and the Duke of Edinburgh, which he inherited recently from his father, as you know. So we have 8 dukes. The date of creation dictates who is in the order of precedent. The Duke of Hamilton is the premier peer in Scotland, and the Duke of Norfolk is the premier peer in England. There's 2 early ones, and then there's a number of them around the time of Queen Anne, and we'll come for the reasons of that. The Duke of Hamilton, he actually has 3 dukedoms. One is French, and I never know how to pronounce it, Châtellerault, 1 Scottish, Hamilton, and 1 British, Brandon. The Hamiltons came to extreme prominence in 1474 when James Hamilton married Mary Stuart, eldest daughter of King James II, and he became Lord Hamilton at that stage. Their descendants were often and for centuries a heartbeat away from the throne, but fortunately they never did come to the throne. The 3rd Lord Hamilton organized the 5-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots' departure from to France in 1548. This was to keep her away from Henry VIII, who had plans that his son Edward should marry Mary and thus united the 2 thrones of Britain. The then King of France also had plans that Mary should marry the Dauphin, become Queen of France and Scotland, and bring Scotland under France's control. She did marry the Dauphin. She did become Queen of France, but fortunately for Scotland, her husband died before they had any children. The widowed Mary was ostracized by the French, and she returned to Scotland. Lord Hamilton was given the title Dukedom of Châtellerault by the French king for arranging Mary's transfer to France. The first Duke of Hamilton, see if I've got the right. The first Duke of Hamilton was close to Charles I and had the misfortune to be the go-between Charles I and the Covenanters. This was an impossible job, but in recognition for his efforts, he was made Duke of Hamilton. He didn't have long to enjoy his dukedom because in an attempt to save Charles I, he raised an army and invaded England. He was soundly defeated by Cromwell and executed for treason shortly after the execution of Charles I. In 1711, the then Duke was made Duke of Brandon in the British peerage. In the late 1600s and 1700s, the Hamiltons became extremely wealthy, and they owned most of Lanarkshire and the coal beneath the ground. As befits their station and wealth, they started building Hamilton Palace in 1695. Absolutely enormous house. Huge house. It's difficult to understand just how massive they were. The interior was beautifully laid out, beautifully full of works of art. This paneling here was one of the 10 rooms that William Randolph Hearst bought at the time of the demolition. Hearst, I'll do another speech about Hearst, a most fascinating character. He used to buy the interiors of great houses and ship them to America to be incorporated into his houses. He brought 10 rooms in Hamilton Palace. He would buy the floors, the fireplaces, the paneling, the ceilings, everything. This is part of the paneling in one of the rooms in Hamilton Palace. When Hearst died, his estate tried to sell the paneling to this room, and they failed to do so. So they gave it to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The Met had no need for it, and they gave it to the National Museum in Edinburgh. And it's now on display in the Scottish Museum. It's only a small part of the paneling and the fireplace and the very fancy crest above. As you can see, the Hamilton Palace was absolutely huge, crammed with works of art. Back in 1474, James II gave his daughter the island of Arran as a wedding present. The Hamiltons proceeded to build Brodick Castle and used it for their summer holidays. The tower was built in 1510 on the site of a much older castle. It's an absolutely beautiful place, I must say. So that's the exterior of the castle. What a wonderful summer house, summer home. Beautifully inlaid, and lots of works of art there, which are the few works of art that still remain in the Hamilton's estate. The 12th Duke of Hamilton had only one child, a daughter, Mary, who married the Duke of Montrose, and thus she became the Duchess of Montrose. And she was left Arran and when she died in 1957, Brodick Castle and 7,300 acres of land was accepted by the Treasury in lieu of death duties and is now run by the National Trust. This next bit, and it headed up the decline. The Hamilton family had more than its fair share of the weaknesses that beset many great families, namely alcohol, gambling, women, failure to produce sons, and lastly, extreme extravagance. In the late 1800s, everything started to go wrong. They said that debts of over £1 million were accumulated in the late 1800s. £1 million it's a lot of money. In 1882, most of the contents of Hamilton Palace were sold at auction. It was the sale of the century and went on for a month and raised £400,000. And all the lovely treasures in Hamilton Palace are now spread throughout Europe. The Hamilton family also lost a lot of land when Mary, their only child of the 12th Duke, inherited the land and married the Duke of Montrose. So the Montrose got a lot of the Hamilton land. The palace was left empty until it was used as a naval hospital in the First World War, which did it no good at all. And they said the real damage was the extraction of coal underneath the palace, resulting in severe subsidence. Others say this was as an excuse, and the coal was extracted after the demolition. The palace was demolished in 1927, and all that is left now is the mausoleum, which designed by William Adam and has wonderful echoes, and Châtellerault, the hunting lodge. It was it's a beautiful building, actually. Beautifully. It's up on the hillside above Hamilton Terrace. They then, once the palace was demolished, they moved to Dungaville House, another house, not a particularly attractive house, I think you'll agree. It's where they stayed after the demolition of the palace. And it was this house that Rudolf Hess was making for on his famous flight. He bailed out over Fleur's farm near Eaglesham, and his plane crashed in Bonneton Farm. Hess had flown 1,200 miles and mistook Eaglesham House for Dungaville and parachuted out. He believed that the Duke of Hamilton could help him with peace talks, even though he'd never met him. The plane landed 2 fields from where I now live. You can imagine the stir this incident caused. Hess was the deputy Führer of Germany. He was arrested by a farm worker armed with a pitchfork. He was eventually taken to the local scout hall, the local this and that, and ended up in the Tower of London for a brief time. After the war, he was tried at the Nuremberg trials, found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment in Spandau. He was the last prisoner in the prison. The prison was guarded on 3 monthly stints by America, Russia, France, and Britain. And they were guarding one man. It was absolutely ridiculous. He was the last prisoner. He committed suicide aged 93. If you see pictures of Hess at the trials, he looks very odd and very bewildered. This house was eventually sold to the National Coal Board in 1947 and has since been used as a prison, a holding point for asylum seekers. Still there. The current Dukes get younger every year. They're like policemen. They seem to get younger and younger. He is the 16th Duke and was born in 1978. His surname is Douglas Hamilton and is the head of both clans. He's hereditary keeper of Holyrood House, where he has large quarters. He has the exclusive right to remove the Scottish crown jewels, which even Queen Nicola doesn't have yet. They now live in Lennox Love. That's his wife, the Duchess, and they live in Lennox Love House in, that's back the way. Lennox Love House in East Lothian. It's actually quite a pretty house compared to the previous two, and it's a lot smaller and a lot more manageable. So that's the Hamiltons. Now we come to the big boy. This is an amazing family. The Dukes of Buccleuch and Queensberry. The surname of the Buccleuchs is Montague Douglas Scott, which is a hint as to how the family owned so many houses. The Scots were wealthy landowners in the Borders. King Charles II was looking for a suitable wife for his oldest favourite illegitimate son, James Croft, or James Fitzroy. He chose the very wealthy Anne Scott, 4th Countess of Buccleuch. She was a countess in her own right. And on their marriage, they were made Duke and Duchess of Monmouth and Buccleuch. On the death of his father, Charles II, Monmouth thought he should have been the heir to his father's throne rather than his uncle, James II and 7th, Charles's brother. He claims that Charles said that he should be king. But anyhow, Monmouth raised an army in 1685 to take the throne, but he was defeated, captured, and executed. The grandson was made Duke of Buccleuch. The Monmouth side was obviously deleted, so he became the first Duke of Buccleuch, and their house was Bow Hill House in the Borders. To cut a very long and very complicated story short, one Duke married a Douglas daughter of the Duke of Queensberry and inherited Drumlanrig. Another married a daughter of the Duke of Montague and inherited Boughton House. The Buccleuch coat of arms is quite interesting. The top left, we have Charles II's, his father's coat of arms, the king. The slash of the white slash across shows that this is his illegitimate son. Illegitimate sons always have a slash across the coat of arms. The next one on the right is people will know that one. Does anybody know that? Argyll. One of the daughters of the Dukes of Argyll married a Buccleuch. So you get the Galley of Lorne there. The third one there with the hearts, this was the king. The king asked a very good friend of his, the king, Robert the Bruce, asked a very good friend of his, Douglas, Sir James Douglas, to take it on crusade, his heart on the crusades with him. Douglas only got as far as Spain, where he was killed fighting the Moors. The casket with the heart inside was recovered, and hence it's in the Douglas coat of arms that's shown there. The casket was recovered and taken to Melrose Abbey, where it's said to still lie. The fourth quarter is the Montague coat of arms. Also, I think quite nicely, the one in the middle, with the yellow, the blue band, that is the coat of arms of the first lady, Anne, Duchess Anne, who married Monmouth. So she started the whole thing. The current Duke was born in 1954. Oh, sorry, don't know why we're there. He succeeded on the death of his father, and he owned 280,000 acres. His father was the Duke, sadly, was in a wheelchair for over 30 years. The current Duke owned 280,000 acres, but I think he sold some recently, so he may have a little less. He has 4 grand houses, Dalkeith Palace, Bowhill House, Drumlanrig, and Boughton House. What a nightmare. Who would want how? This is the one at Bowhill near Selkirk. It was the home of the Scott side of the family. It was started in 1812, and it's absolutely enormous. It's 430 feet long, and it's full of works of art. The house was badly plagued by dry rot, wet rot, death walk beetle, everything, but it's now been subject to major renovation. In Bowhill House, there is a magnificent silver wine cistern made in 1711, weighing more than 9 stone. This was a present from the Duke of Argyll to his daughter. Duke of Argyll was made an ambassador to Spain. When an ambassador was appointed to go to Europe, the government gave him a sum of money to decorate the embassy dining room to enhance the status of Britain. They were supposed to return the silverware after their office finished, but they really did. There's no picture of the one in in Bowhill, but I have one which is quite similar from Burley House. This is even bigger. It was made in 1701, and it weighs 13 stone. You could almost have a bath in that wine cistern. Bowhill is lovely. Look at the hall. The Duke keeps his collection of miniatures in Bowhill. He's 800 miniatures by the finest miniature painters in Britain. Holbein, Hilliard, and Samuel Cooper, dated from the 16th, 17th century. My favorite is this one. Do we know who that is? Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. It's unfinished, it's a watercolor, and it is absolutely fantastic. You can almost feel he's about to speak to you. And the artists asked him how he wanted to be painted. He said, "Paint me warts and all." So he certainly did. Drumlanrig is in the Queensberry estate, came into the family when the second Duke married Douglas, and they inherited Drumlanrig. It was built between 1679 and 1689, built in beautiful pink sandstone. It's large with 120 rooms, 17 turrets and 4 towers. Like the other Buccleuch houses, it's full of wonderful works of art. The 9th Duke, who was in his wheelchair for 36 years as a result of a riding accident, His favorite painting was Leonardo's Madonna of the Yarn Winder. When he was traveling to his various houses, he used to put it in the boot of his car to take it with him. Sadly, the painting was stolen from Drumlanrig in 2003. Two men in raincoats took the picture off the wall and hid it under his coat. When the lady asked what they were doing, he said, "Don't worry, love, we are the police and this is an exercise." And they walked out with it and they got away with it. The painting was recovered 4 years later. Sadly, unfortunately, the old Duke was dead by that time. The police raided a Glasgow lawyer's office in 2007, by which time the old Duke had died. I know you lawyers, there must be some lawyers here, but there you are. And all the Glasgow lawyers knew who this chap was. Amazingly, nobody was convicted of the theft. The current Duke has decided it's safer in the National Gallery, which is now on display, and it's well worth going to see it. A Leonardo was sold in November last year for $450 million. It's believed there are only about 20, a few more than 20 paintings by Leonardo and very few in private hands. Philip Mould, the art dealer that we know on the telly a lot, said that if the Leonardo that was sold was worth $450 million, and he said, very big if, the Beclou Leonardo, which is a much better painting, could be worth $1 billion. Absolute crazy. It's interesting that the Leonardo that was sold for 450 to some Saudi Middle East state has never since been on display. There is severe questioning about its authenticity. There's always much debate about how much of a Leonardo was actually painted by him and how much by the master, but this is thought to be a very good one. The Drumlanrig is beautiful, lots of wooden panelling. The next one is Dalkeith Palace. It was built by Anne Scott, the widow of the Duke of Monmouth, the one whose coat of arms we saw. Huge quantities of marble were imported, and Grinling Gibbons did the carving. Until the 1920s, it was the principal seat of the family. It's now in a long lease to Wisconsin University, which must be a great relief to the family. Oh. This is now, well, that's inside Dalkeith Palace before it was emptied and the content spread elsewhere. This is Boughton House in Northamptonshire. This is the one I haven't been to. It was once a monastic building and came to the family through the marriage of Elizabeth Montagu, daughter of the third Duke of Montagu. It evolved over the 1500s and 1600s. It's a vast house, and one wing has never been finished. It's full of works of art again. Look at the size of that. It's absolutely enormous. That's the four houses that the Duke still owns. I find the Beclou family absolutely fascinating, as they still own these four houses. And then recently I was reading the memories of Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, who was a Beclou, daughter of the 7th Duke of Beclou. She gave a wonderful insight into life in the years before the First World War. At Drumlanrig House, there were 100 gardeners and 30 or 40 indoor staff. The greenhouses stretched for 800 yards. And the family used to spend 3 months in each house commuting between the four houses by private train. In each house, there were 2 barrels of whiskey, each containing 54 gallons of whiskey. So that's 108 gallons, or 100 dozen bottles. And I presume there were similar stores of sherry, port, wine, etc. And we think we've got an alcohol problem now. The next one is the Duke of Argyll. Oh, sorry. Difficult to see in this light. You all know this. Most of you will presumably have been head of the Clan Campbell, seated in Inverary. Building work started in 1743 and was not completed in 1789. Sorry, you're getting a lot of, is this me? looking down, a lot of interference. So, anyhow, we all know it's on Loch Fyne. The armory is a fabulous room. It has a ceiling 21 meters high, and the highest in Scotland. The Campbells, and the great thing about this room is trying to heat it, because if your ceiling's 21 meters high, you guess where the hot air goes. They also owned Roseneath Castle, which used to belong to the Lennox family until it was confiscated and given to the Campbells in the 16th century. It was destroyed by fire yes, the original castle was destroyed in 1802, and this neoclassical mansion was built to replace it. Princess Louise, a daughter of Queen Victoria, the Dowager Duchess of Argyll, resided in Roseneath until her death in 1939, after which time it was sold and then demolished in 1961. It's now the site of a caravan park. The 12th Duke of Argyll, who died in 2001, has, I think, two great achievements to his credit. The first was marrying Iona Cahoon of Luss. I said Luss, didn't I? No, of Luss, who brought some stability to the family and was a lot better than some of the previous duchesses. On Guy Fawkes Day in 1975, there was a terrible fire in the upper stories of the castle. The Duchess was in the castle with her two children and an old retainer when the fire broke out. The Duke was driving home up the rest to be thankful, and he saw the horizon, and the whole of the west horizon was lit up by the fire. The people of the town helped to save the contents of the castle, and they saved, I think, all of them. It was amazing thing, and nothing was stolen from that rescue. The Duke's second great achievement was to raise funds from all over the world to restore the castle, and it is now in great condition, much to his credit. The 13th Duke of Argyll is married to a Cadbury, which must help, and they have two sons and a daughter. Excuse me. That's the Argylls. Then we have Athol, Blair Castle, which you will all know here. You'll have driven past it many times. The Dukes of Argyll are head of the Murray clan, and in 1703, Queen Anne made the Marquis a Duke, because of his support. During the 1715 Jacobite rebellion, the Duke and his second son supported the government. The eldest and the younger sons supported the Stuart cause. This was quite common because it meant that some of the family were always on the winning side. The losing side could go to France and live in France. The Atholls had a number of pieces of good luck throughout the marriage. Through the marriage of a daughter of the Earl of Derby, they inherited the sovereignty of the Isle of Man. Goodness knows what that meant. They sold the sovereignty to the government of Britain in 1765 and got £70,000 for that in 1765. In 1828, they sold the remaining property and rights that they owned in the Isle of Man for £417,000. In 1863, the railway went through the lands of Athol, and they were compensated for that. Dukes of Athol were given the right to raise a private army by Queen Victoria, and this tradition continues to this day. The 10th Duke of Athol, because of his immense height, which is 6'5", he never married, and he's called Wee Ian. He, as I say, he never married, and so he had no legitimate children. The 10th Duke's will said that the land and the castle and its contents, 145,000 acres, should be given to a charitable trust and run by their trustees, one of whom is his half-sister. From what I've seen, they're doing an amazing job. When you're driving up the A9, I thoroughly recommend that instead of stopping at the House of Brewer, you visit the castle. it might be a whole lot cheaper. It's also a great place for a wedding in the ballroom. We've actually been to a wedding there. It's fantastic. The stag's head, there were hundreds of stag's heads up there. The 11th Duke was a second cousin once removed of wee Ian, and he lives in South Africa, which is rather sad. But he does visit Blair Castle every year. The next one, the Dukes of Montrose. The Dukes of Montrose are head of the Graham clan. Are there any Grahams here? No, good, because I'm going to insult them. The great Marquis of Montrose was one of the greatest military heroes Scotland ever had. He led the cause for Charles I in Scotland and won many battles against the Covenanters. He was absolutely amazing and is one of my heroes. And actually, if you go to St Andrews University Museum, you can still see the silver medals. The students that won the archery competition had to supply a silver medal and give it to the university. You can still see the Marquis of Montrose silver medal in the university museum. But the poor Marquis was ultimately defeated, betrayed by Neil MacLeod of Assynt, and like Wallace, executed in a most hideous way. His titles were restored by Charles II, and the dukedom was given to him by the Queen Anne for his support in the Act of Union. The original house was built in 1850. This house was built to replace it. It was, again, not a terribly pretty house. It was sold in the 1930s, opened as a hotel, then as a hospital in the war, and the roof was taken off in 1954. I'm afraid for members of the Graham clan, this is now your clan seat. The 8th Duke was born in Rhodesia, and his father, 7th Duke, made the huge mistake of moving to Rhodesia. He was a member of Ian Smith's government and was one of the signatories to the UDI, Rhodesia's Unilateral Declaration of Independence. I saw him in 1966 having lunch in the Salisbury Club at the next door table. Some say the 7th Duke was lucky to be allowed back to Britain because technically he'd been guilty of treason. He was allowed to return to die in Scotland shortly before his death. It looks as though the family had at least one of the vices previously mentioned, as the 4th Duke and his wife built a racecourse at Buchanan Castle. My father spent some time in the castle when it was a hospital in the Second World War, and he remembers seeing the racecourse where the golf course now is. The great Marquis, my hero, was hugely wealthy, and although the descendants got the title back after his execution, I suspect they lost most of the land. The other financial disaster was moving to Rhodesia, where he lost his fortune, and all the land that they really had inherited from the Hamiltons. The current Duke was born in Rhodesia, was a Tory politician, and became a shadow minister for Scotland. He lives at Auchmar near Balmaha and describes himself as a sheep farmer. The Dukes of Roxburgh. The family name is Innes Kerr, following the marriage between a Kerr daughter and an Innes son. The first Duke was awarded the dukedom in 1707, like the Duke of Montrose, for supporting the Act of Union. In the early 1900s, the British aristocracy was very short of money, and American heiresses had lots of it and had a great desire for a title. The best known marriage was the marriage between the Duke of Marlborough and Consuelo Vanderbilt. The marriage brought great amounts of cash to the Duke of Marlborough, but there was no love lost, and it was a very unhappy marriage. The 8th Duke here married one of Consuelo's Vanderbilt's bridesmaids called May Gullet. Very pretty. Her father owned a lot of Manhattan, and she brought a dowry of $20 million to the Duke of Roxburgh, and a lot of art and fabulous jewels. What I like about this story, it was a very happy marriage between May and the 8th Duke. Floors Castle claims to be the largest occupied castle in Scotland. It was originally designed by William Adam in 1721. Actually, Adam's building is that one there, that square building, quite small. Adam designed it. It was a plain, symmetrical Georgian house. The 6th Duke invited William Playfair to remodel the house in around 1837. And this is what we see today. It's an absolutely stunning building. When you get out of the car and you walk around the corner and you see this building with its turrets, and it is absolutely beautiful. Playfair also designed Donaldson's College in Edinburgh, Casorphin Road. You can see the similarities on a slightly smaller scale to that. In the ballroom, we were going around with friends one day when one of our friends said, the chairs look a bit tatty here. There's some loose threads, and these are the chairs along there. And the attendant said, well, the fact that they date from the time of William and Mary may account for their condition. Floors has a wonderful collection of tapestries, paintings, French furniture, or other works of art, nearly all due to Duchess May. The 10th Duke died in 2019, and his son, Charles, the 11th Duke, lives at Floors. He was married for a year, a while ago, and divorced in 2012, but remarried in September this year. So ladies, I'm sorry, Scotland's most eligible bachelor is no longer available. He still has no legitimate children. This estate extends to 56,000 acres, all round Kelso, 45 tenanted farms, and wonderful salmon fishing on the Tweed. Now this gets tricky. This is a difficult one, so concentrate. I'll have to concentrate. The earldom of Sutherland dates back to 1240. It's the second oldest earldom in Scotland, the eldest being the earldom of Mar. The earldom can pass through the female line, whilst the dukedom can only go through the male line. In around 1800, the then Countess of Sutherland married the second Marquess of Stafford, and it was this time that he was involved in the Highland clearances. He became Duke of Sutherland in 1833, but he died 5 months later. Their house was and is Dunrobin. Lovely house in the northeast. Actually nicer on the outside than I thought it was on the inside. It's on the northeast coast. It evolved over the centuries and was really added to finally in 1835 by Sir Charles Barry. In 1963, the 5th Duke of Sutherland died without leaving a male heir, and the dukedom went to a distant cousin, the 5th Earl of Ellesmere. The earldom, which can go through the female line, went to his niece Elizabeth, the Countess of Sutherland, who died only recently in 2019. Her son is now the 25th Earl of Sutherland. So we now have, told you it was complicated, we now have the 25th Earl of Sutherland and the 7th Duke of Sutherland. Now, this is the only photograph I could find of the Duke of Sutherland. I'm sure, I don't know why, I can't be terribly proud of it, I wouldn't have thought. His name was Francis Edgerton, and he lives in Merton House in St. Boswell's in the Borders. This Duke has 2 sons, aged 46 and 44, and he has 7 grandchildren. So you'd think the line was secure. Well, alas, all 7 grandchildren are daughters. So they'll either have to try again, they're maybe getting a bit old for that in the late 40s, or they have to find another son. Now, they had to go back 200 years to find this man, so I don't know how they would find another house, another heir. The Duke of Sutherland lives in Merton House. It was bought by the family in 1912. It started in 1703 by Sir William Bruce. In 1956, 2 wings to the house were demolished, returning it to its original size. The then Duchess was heard saying, "Thank goodness we demolished these 2 wings. It means I have 50 fewer rooms to worry about." The Earls of Ellesmere, who became the Duke of Sutherland, inherited a wonderful collection of paintings which came to London during the French Revolution. Most of the collection was bought by the 3rd Duke of Bridgewater, who was the richest man in England at the time, from his Bridgewater canals and from the coal under his land. He's the ancestor of the current Duke. The collection of paintings he bought, and actually I have done a talk on the Bridgewater collection. When I was going around the National Gallery years ago, I noticed there were little wooden circles of wood with numbers on them, about the size of your thumbnail. And I thought, what? They must all belong to the same collection. And they were all titled the Bridgewater Collection. And I thought, what on earth's the Bridgewater Collection? Anyhow, the Duke of Bridgewater bought the French collection from the Duke of Orleans, who was a cousin of Louis XVI, and he tried to raise money to try and get back the throne. He brought his paintings, 200 of them, to London to sell. It's the finest collection of paintings in private hands. The Duke of Bridgewater, as I say, the richest man in England, he paid £40,000 for the 200 paintings. He then he kept the best 100, and he sold the other 100 for £40,000. So he got 100 paintings of the very finest quality for nothing. The previous Duke, he's got these paintings. He has lent 32 of them to the National Gallery in Edinburgh, and he lent them 70 years ago. So they've been in the National Gallery for 70 years. He started to sell 1 or 2, but he still owns 25 of them. The ones he still owns include 2 Titians, 3 Raphaels, and these Raphaels are fantastic. He actually the Duke of Bridgewater paid more for the Raphaels than he did for the 2 paintings by Titian that we're going to see shortly. They're absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, the Duke has copyright for the paintings that are in the National Gallery, and you can't get them on the internet. So he still owns 2 Titians, 3 Raphaels, a Rembrandt, 8 Poussins, a Tintoretto, and lots more. A few years ago, the Duke said to the trustees that he wished to sell his 2 big Titians. And one of them is here. He wished to sell them because most of his wealth is in these paintings. He get 2 sons. How is he going to get some cash to give one of the sons? So the trustee said, well, I suppose you have to. We've had them for 70 years. What are they worth? And they nearly fell off their chairs. He said they're worth 150 million each. And they are worth 150 million each. They are big. They're about 5 foot square. He said, but because it's a National Gallery, and presumably there's some tax thing, if you sell to a National Gallery, you don't pay capital gains tax on it, or some deal like that. He said, but you can have the 2 of them for 100 million. The trustees gulped. Like, 100 million? How are we going to get that? Edinburgh couldn't raise the 100 million. So they spoke to London, the National Gallery in London, and decided that they would try to raise it between them. They raised 95 million, and the Duke said, well, okay, forget the last 5 million. So the nation got them for 100 million and they were worth 300 million. And they would get 300 million tomorrow. These paintings were 2 of 6 commissioned by Philip II of Spain. This was the King of Spain who married Bloody Mary, Mary Tudor, the Catholic Queen of England. So there were 6 paintings. 1 is in the Wallace collection, one of my favorite collections in the country. 2 are in the Prado, and 1 was in Boston. The 6 scenes are taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is Diana and Actaeon. Diana and her women, the goddess, are disturbed while bathing. This is this is Diana here. And Actaeon, the hunter, was trying to get out of the sun into this copse of wood. And when he saw Diana, he dropped his bow and arrow, threw up his hands at the beauty of this lady. Diana was furious. She turned him into a stag, which was then attacked and killed by his dogs. As I say, these 6 stations are amongst the finest, best-known paintings in the world. His second one, Diana and Callisto. Callisto was known for her purity. This is Diana here. This is Callisto down here. But Callisto was seduced by Jupiter. And here we see her pregnancy exposed. Diana was furious and banished her. I arranged a visit to Merton House, organized by the National Gallery in Edinburgh. Unfortunately, the Duke and Duchess were not at home, but we were shown round the house by the butler, as you do, in his official tales. The house is absolutely beautiful. It's smallish compared to the others we've seen, probably maybe 8 bedrooms. It's very bright, it's light. And going around it, I had my catalogue of the Bridgewater Collection paintings. And there are 120 paintings in this house that I counted. And there's lots we probably didn't see. And that's on top of the 32 paintings he has in the National Gallery. It's one of the finest collections of paintings in the country. The last one, the last one, the 4th Duke of Fife. This is the one most people have not heard of. This was Alexander Duff, the 6th Earl of Fife, married Princess Louise, eldest daughter of the then Prince and Princess of Wales, Alexandra and Edward. Queen Victoria made them Duke and Duchess of Fife, and they only had a daughter. She became Duchess of Fife, and she married. Her title went to her nephew, James Carnegie. In that case, the dukedom did go to the female. Some dukedoms can go through the female line, and others can't. So this is the 4th Duke of Fife and his house, Elsick House. Oh, sorry, back the way. So that's the. Come on. That's the final dukes. So that's the 8 dukes, amazing ones. The clues I find absolutely amazing that they can keep going and run these houses in great condition. Right, thank you very much. I'll answer any questions. Any questions? Well, can I ask a question? Who's the richest duke? You tell me. No? From what you've seen, who do you think? Times rich list, the Duke of Sutherland is the richest with 600 million. Buccleuch is only worth 250 million. Now, how can that be? Because he owns a Leonardo, for goodness sake. I don't know. But these things in the Sunday Times, if you asked any, and then the third one is Roxburgh, if you asked any of these 3, how much are they worth? I don't think they could tell you within 10 million. They're all tied up in trusts. Some of them are charitable trusts. Do they own them? Do they not own them? It's impossible to tell. But Sutherland is, according to the Sunday Times, the richest. mainly because of his paintings. He doesn't have much land. He doesn't have buildings apart from Merton House. If I had to live in one of them, it would be Merton House. Lovely, lovely house. Any other
Okay,
questions?
thank you. That was terrific and fascinating evening. The question, I mean, what I'd like to know is how they generate revenues at the moment. How do they maintain and upkeep these huge houses? I mean, as you say, most of their wealth is tied up in buildings and paintings.
They've got land. The big ones have Buccleuch
Right.
and Roxburgh and everything have land, which is well maintained, tenanted farm. And of course, visitors to their houses. I find it a real privilege to go into one of these houses, pay 10 quid or 5 quid or something, and go and look at their homes. I mean, it's amazing. And that generates a lot of income from Drumlanrig and Floors Castle and the other castles. It's a wonderful establishment, I think, that we're able to visit these places. And if it helps with a roof, I'm prepared to help with a tenner. One question I would like to ask all of you: have I missed out any dukes? Well, possibly. I thought up here you would know. What about the Duke of Gordon? Well, I had a last look at this, and it's very complicated. I came across the last Duke of Gordon died in 1836. He was the 5th Duke. He left no children, and the title became extinct. So that was that. Duke of Gordon's gone. The other one was Lennox, Duke of Lennox. Very Scottish title, but it was extinct. It became extinct 3 times. And the dukedom of Richmond and Lennox were created by Charles II, for his illegitimate son again. So he created a new dukedom, a Scottish dukedom of Lennox. Not his son was Scottish in the title at all, but he got that. And he also gave him an English title, Duke of Richmond. So he became Duke of Richmond and Lennox because he was the illegitimate son of Charles II. There are actually 4 dukedoms still in existence which come from descendants of Charles II's illegitimate children. One is Grafton, one is St Albans, and the other was Buccleuch, which we mentioned earlier, Monmouth. So this illegitimate son became Duke of Richmond and Lennox. The 5th Duke of Gordon, Duke of Gordon's sister, married the 4th Duke of Richmond. And although the title was extinct, for some reason, the Duke of Lennox, Richmond and Lennox was also made Duke of Gordon. What the logic for all this is, I have no idea. So we now have the Duke of Richmond and Lennox and Gordon. Neither of them are English, and they live in Goodwood House. But these are 2 Scottish titles that were given to Englishmen, and as far as I could see, that's the only dukedom that I know of that I've missed out. But if anybody knows anything else, there are no dukes here, are there? No, right.
What's the relevance of them today? I mean, they've got these huge houses, they've got these anachronistic titles, they all seem to be illegitimate, and why have we got them still?
Well, if you were to charge inheritance tax on one of these big houses, Floors, any of them, what would the government do? They didn't have the money to pay the value of the house. What they would do, they would give the house to the government in lieu of estate duty, inheritance tax. What would the government do then? They would give them to the National Trust. But the National Trust would say, we don't want it. We need a big endowment. So the government would end up not owning the house. They would end up out of pocket because they give the National Trust huge amounts of money to pay for the upkeep of the house. Much better to keep it to the people who live there, love it, and look after it at no cost to the government than have it passed over to the National Trust. They are fantastic assets to the country and extremely important to visit as a visitor attraction throughout Scotland. I mean, tens of thousands of people go and visit these houses. And I would urge you to, if you're in the neighbourhood, go and visit them because they are absolutely fascinating. So that's what I see as a relevance.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Yes. And how much interconnection is there between these 8 dukes? I mean, how do they get together at parties, or they hate each other, or what's the kind of relationship between
I don't think they have much of a relationship at all, because down in Melrose there's quite a collection of dukedoms. There's the Sutherlands down there, Buccleuch's down there, Northumberland is just across or very close, and the Roxburghs are there. Roxburghs and the Northumberlands don't get on terribly well because Roxburgh built a wind farm. Is that right? Built a wind farm, much to the Northumberland's distrust and annoyance. So I don't think there is much of a contact. And they are different ages, of course. I mean, they're the Duke of Hamilton's just a boy, really. Well, looked a boy. That's an old photograph. But they, it's going from 80 years old down to late 20s, I think.
Okay. So, Chris.
One duke you haven't mentioned, he's not a Scottish duke, he's English, but he owns an awful lot of land in Scotland. There's the Duke of Westminster.
Yes.
How did you come about owning so much land in Scotland?
He's an Englishman. He's entitled to buy land in Scotland if he's got the money. So, but he's not English, so I didn't include him. But he does own a lot of land all over the place. He's got the money. He likes the Highlands, so buy the land. Yeah. One that I looked at. Sorry.
There's just a question there.
Does anybody ever question how they got the land?
Who did they steal it from?
We were talking 600 years plus.
I've been working on it for a long time.
I've no idea. They were clan chiefs, and the clan chief got the land, and through time and everything, I think they got it. But
after the Reformation, they actually stole all the common good land.
No, they owned most of it before that, I think.
No, I don't think so.
No. Well,
how could they give? Somebody gave Arran away. I mean, how did somebody manage to give out the Isle of Arran away?
Hamilton, when the Hamilton didn't have they only had a daughter. He gave it to his wife. Hamilton owned Arran.
But how did he get it?
He was given it by the king.
And how did the king get it?
49. Well, he owned everything.
Or nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
Anyway,
yeah, but you could go back and study that and never come up with the answers, I suspect.
I think it's ironic that you were saying that some of the people made their money from coal.
Yep.
And now have been blamed for all the pollution. So maybe they should take the estates, sell them.
Of course, we don't burn any coal in Scotland now, which some is probably a good thing, but I don't know where we're going to get our power from if we don't.
Well, more wind farms.
And our two nuclear power stations are due to be phased out fairly soon. But yes, Lanarkshire was a massive coal-producing area, and it was the wealth that Hamilton had was enormous. But he frittered it all away. I mean, by late 1800s, he was in debt to $1 million. I mean, the thing is ludicrous. I mean, that mausoleum, I think he spent 150,000 on. I don't know what the hunting lodge cost to build. That would be a lot. And actually, the National Museum of Scotland is trying to buy back items that were sold from Hamilton Palace. And they've had some very good new purchases to repurchase the items that were part of Scotland's heritage and bring them back to Edinburgh. But I mean, they're extremely expensive items, and there's a big limit to really how much they can buy back. But it's the items they have brought back is beside that wall paneling that I showed you at Scottish Museums. If you're in the Scottish Museum, look out for it. It's hard to miss, and you'll see a lot of items that were brought back from Hamilton Palace. It's sad that Hamilton Palace, all that, even if that a lot had been put into a museum, it would be fabulous. And the places, the main art galleries in Europe are crammed full of stuff from Hamilton Palace.
Well, on that thoughtful note,
an hour to the minute.
Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
Not at all. Thank you.
relax with a glass of wine. So
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Very.
It's, we won't fill one of those silver salvers that you were showing us.
Apparently, that one in Burley House is used for if they're having a family outing. They fill it with champagne bottles, and then I mean, literally, you could almost have a bath in it. It's vast, solid silver, 13 stone.
It's a miniature hot tub.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much.
Not
Again.
at
That's
all.
been great, really informative and interesting. Our next talk is in a fortnight's time with Kenny Cortland, who is part of the Cairngorm Predator Project. And I think it'll be a really interesting, fascinating evening because there's quite a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion going around in terms of the reintroduction of, as part of the rewilding notion of predators and the kind of interrelationship between so capercaillie and pine martens, for instance. So I think there'll be a lot of interest in the talk he's going to give in terms of the work of the Predator Project and the research that they've undertaken. So I hope you'll come along to that and see you in a fortnight's time. But thank you very much for coming on tonight. I hope you enjoyed this evening.
Thank you.